Okay, with that, please give a warm welcome to Claire Johnson. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you for the AIE for the invitation. Stephanie warned me in advance that I would be speaking to a room full of engineers. And I'm getting more and more used to that. As a non-engineer, I like to think that I'm almost becoming engineeringly minded from point of proximity. So I speak to engineers, our members are engineers. My dad's an engineer, my partner is an engineer. I think I'm secretly a try-hard engineer, but I'm not. I have a background in economics. I would love to be technical. Fortunately, we have about 29 members within our organisation who are very technically minded. But I'm here to talk to you tonight about the bigger picture presented by hydrogen. And I'm sure you've heard a huge amount about hydrogen, the opportunity for Australia over the recent months. And of course, it'd be remiss of me not to mention the election. I'll touch on some of the implications of that for hydrogen very shortly. But it's been a really interesting time for our space with a huge amount of momentum occurring around how can Australia capture this opportunity to both produce and create a domestic sector for hydrogen, but how can we start exporting our renewable energy overseas in volume? So it's hugely exciting. I got my first taste of hydrogen vehicles back in 2015 when I was working for Toyota. We imported a Mirai, which is a fuel cell vehicle that Toyota manufactures now in Japan. So we imported a single unit of that car to Australia. We brought it over on a ship. We didn't have anywhere to refuel it in Australia. It had about 3/4 of a tank of hydrogen, and we had to count every single kilometre we drove in that car because there was no way of filling it up again. And part of my role was talking to governments, so lobbying, influencing governments to try and get them excited about hydrogen transport. And it was a tough job. We took the car up to Canberra, on the back of the truck, of course, and we took it up to Parliament House in Canberra, and we got politicians, some just weren't interested. Those politicians that were, we took the test drives around Parliament House. And for me, it was really exciting because I could see the potential. You know, working for Toyota, I knew what their plans were to introduce these cars around the world. But from a politician's perspective, they looked at the vehicle like it was a science experiment. They didn't really understand it. They didn't know what role it was going to play. They didn't recognise it as an electric vehicle, which it is. But fast forward, 4, 5 years later, and we're in a very different place. Just 2 weeks ago, we announced the very first public refuelling station will open in Canberra in December of this year. The ACT government will take a fleet of 20 Hyundai Nexos, which is a hydrogen-powered SUV, and we're actively talking to governments and private sector fleet managers around the country about the opportunity to integrate hydrogen fuel cell vehicles into their fleet. So it's a very exciting time. One of those governments is the Queensland government, and Queensland, and in particular your Premier, is hugely excited by hydrogen. We're eagerly waiting for the Queensland government to release their hydrogen strategy, which is expected to come out in June, and that will outline a roadmap or a pathway for how Queensland can develop a domestic sector for hydrogen across applications such as transport, energy storage, and so forth. But really, how to use those domestic-based activities to scale up production and become a large-scale exporter of Queensland's renewable energy to places like Japan, Korea, Singapore and China. So the Premier got in a Hyundai Nexo at the end of 2018 in Korea. She came back, as I said, very excited, and we expect that Queensland's going to play a very big role in the hydrogen transition. What we've seen quite recently is that Queensland was actually the first state in Australia to export green hydrogen to Japan in the form of methyl cyclohexane, which is a carrier of hydrogen. So really, it's a small start, but Queensland is obviously gearing up very strongly. But to be in a position where you can export your sunshine to the world, so it's very, very exciting. So our industry association was co-founded by Toyota and Hyundai in 2017. We very much have a mobility focus at this point in time, but I'll show you very shortly some of our members. We have interest across the whole hydrogen value chain. And really that's in recognition that if we are going to introduce hydrogen vehicles in volume to Australia, we really need to create that underpinning hydrogen energy sector, which is currently absent at the moment in the sense of clean hydrogen. We've been obviously producing hydrogen in Australia for decades for chemical and industrial customers through steam methane reforming of natural gas. But the whole purpose of hydrogen is around decarbonisation. So we want to decarbonise transport, we want to decarbonise the energy sector through the application of hydrogen as well as other technologies as well. So it's just one storage mechanism that can play an important role alongside batteries, hydro and so forth. So our mission is to realise a hydrogen society or economy for Australia. And the concept of a hydrogen economy is essentially one where hydrogen is a predominant part of the energy mix. And the countries that are most quickly transitioning to the concept of a hydrogen economy are Japan and Korea. So Japan next year in 2020 will hold their Olympics in Tokyo, and they're branding that the Hydrogen Olympics. So the Olympic flame will be powered by hydrogen. All the buses that transport the athletes will be hydrogen buses. It's their opportunity to showcase hydrogen to the world. So that's really part of their strategy of transitioning away from nuclear for obvious reasons, and also fossil fuels. So they see hydrogen as a replacement for those energy sources. Equally, Korea is moving towards a hydrogen society as well. They see huge opportunities for transport and for power generation through the application of hydrogen. And following them somewhat behind is China and Singapore. When people say to me, why can't they just generate their own hydrogen? They can, but when you look at their strategies that the governments have released, you'll see the massive quantities of hydrogen that they require to start to power their economies and start that replacement process from some of those existing fuels. And so Australia's position in the world, our massive land mass, our strengths in solar and wind, mean that we are very well placed to be that provider of significant sums of hydrogen to those countries. And ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, commissioned a report into the opportunity to export hydrogen last year. That study was conducted by AIE Allen, and what they found is that the hydrogen export industry will really kick in from 2030, so we've got about 10 years to progressively scale up production skills capability in Australia now, but it could, at its uppermost limit in 2040, represent about 82 million tonnes of hydrogen, creating about $4 billion of value added. So it's a massive opportunity that is being pitched as potentially being bigger than the LNG sector, or the next LNG. So in terms of our membership, from the days of Toyota and Hyundai, we have expanded very quickly. So while we started off very much with the OEM focus, we brought organisations together that will really help us not only enable a hydrogen mobility sector in Australia, but also a hydrogen energy sector. So we brought companies together such as Caltex, BP, Viva, which is Shell's licensee in Australia, and they are actively looking at the opportunity to put hydrogen stations on their forecourts. We've also got the electrolyser manufacturers such as Siemens and ITM Power. And then we also have new faces. I haven't updated my slide, but Fortescue Metals Group just joined our organisation last month. I was discussing with a gentleman here before that they have acquired, or partly in an arrangement, they're working with the CSIRO on a technology that was developed by CSIRO over the past 10 years, which is an ammonia membrane, which essentially has the ability to pass through ammonia, crack out the hydrogen in a very pure format that can then power vehicles. So the purpose of that ammonia membrane technology is that ammonia is an ideal carrier for hydrogen. We export ammonia around the world now, predominantly for fertiliser use. So being able to ship ammonia from Australia to countries like Japan, using this CSIRO membrane to crack out the hydrogen from that ammonia, and then using it in vehicles is something that obviously Fortescue is very excited about and to become a partner in that technology, which is really exciting. But it's really pleasing to see that we've got some really big names on there that are actively looking at the opportunity to integrate hydrogen into their business models, as they see that this is, they say it's the fuel of the future, but I like to think it's the fuel of now, where the economics are starting to stack up in a way that they haven't before. Hydrogen's been somewhat incremental in its development. You may have heard of various hydrogen waves in the past, but the economics are really starting to become far more attractive. The cost of equipment is falling, the cost of hydrogen itself is falling, and the R&D and pilots and demonstrations is really transitioning to a point where the sector on a global scale is starting to scale up. And it's through scale that the economics will increasingly shape up. So our organisation, we are the industry body for the hydrogen sector. So our key purpose in life is really talking to governments about how they can support or how they can help us create a hydrogen sector in Australia. So we very much are at the market creation point at this stage. And so the things that we talk to governments about are about getting the regulations and standards in place. So from a hydrogen perspective, the infrastructure, there are standards that exist overseas, a whole set of ISO standards for hydrogen technologies that are in place and increasingly being updated over time. Australia has yet to adopt those ISO standards for things such as hydrogen infrastructure. So what we're doing is we're closely working with Standards Australia, and we've recently set up a mirroring committee so we can start that process of harmonising the relevant ISO standards into Australian standards, so investors, project developers, project implementers and so forth have confidence that when they're investing in hydrogen equipment and hydrogen projects, that they can refer to an Australian set of standards. So we're very much doing that. We're also talking to governments about other measures to help us be able to build a hydrogen sector at the time. And so things such as co-investment, incentives and so forth are certainly useful, but at this point we just want some government coordination. And as I touched on before, the election outcome, I wouldn't call it disappointing from a hydrogen perspective. For those who are unaware, the ALP had proposed a $1 billion plan to support the hydrogen sector. When I got the phone call the night before that they were going to release that plan, the Shadow Assistant Minister for Energy, Pat Conroy, gave me a call. He's like, "Look, I'm just letting you know we've got an announcement about hydrogen coming out tomorrow." It's like the $1 billion plan. I said, "Is that a B or is that an M?" Like a B just sounded quite incredible. So it was $1 billion, predominantly clean energy finance court money as well as ARENA. Obviously that now is redundant, but nevertheless the coalition through COAG is currently developing a national hydrogen strategy. And as our chief scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, is spearheading that strategy and really driving the conversation around hydrogen. He's been a wonderful advocate for us. And as he likes to say, Australia doesn't have a national strategy on anything. So quite a depressing statement, but partly true. So really, in some ways, from a hydrogen perspective, we've been a little bit spoilt. And then they looked at what would be with hydrogen. And they found that battery electric double bus would carry about 5 tonnes of batteries, whereas about half as much for fuel cell. So inevitably they went down the fuel cell route. So it's just a really good example there, but playing a role in the heavy vehicle segment. The other advantage is the range, of course, as well. Hydrogen is a very energy-dense carrier, so it presents opportunities for a longer range. So the Hyundai Nexo, which is the car the ACT government will take, has an 800-kilometre range, which is about double battery electric. And of course, the refuelling time. So we're talking about 3 to 5 minutes to refuel these vehicles, in a very similar fashion to what you do today. So I will show you a refuelling station in a moment, but overseas we're seeing a hydrogen Bowser side by side with a petrol or a diesel Bowser. And the process is really no different to filling up an LPG vehicle, for instance. So we've overcome that psychological hurdle. And so in the passenger car segment, for those consumers that can't charge their vehicles at home, for instance, might live in an apartment building, hydrogen refuelling may be the best option for them. So why are we talking about hydrogen at all? So there's a number of reasons, and my experience at Hydrogen Mobility Australia, before that working at Toyota, one of our key focus areas was emission standards. So Australia is one of the only a small number of OECD countries that doesn't have a vehicle emission standard for light vehicles. We've been talking with governments about one since 2009. You would think that the OEMs may not support a vehicle emission standard because it means they can sell whatever they like in the market. It's actually not the case, because vehicle emission standards, pretty much in all their major markets around the world, they want certainty about it. In Australia, they're calling for vehicle emission standards. So we've worked with the coalition since 2015 on trying to implement a CO2 standard for new vehicles. Unfortunately, come the election, that policy agenda is no longer on the table. So the great thing, if we did have a vehicle emission standard, it's the ultimate promoter of low emitting vehicles, including hydrogen and battery electric vehicles. So it really provides a stimulus. It essentially costs the government nothing. So we're very much pushing the vehicle emission standard very, very strongly. We don't think Australia should be a standout without one. Because our transport emissions continue to rise. Transport has been the biggest emitter, has seen the biggest increase in emissions of any sector since the 1990s. The emissions are increasing as we use our vehicles more and more. We have a massive problem in the passenger car segment for emissions, but also heavy vehicles, and I'll talk about freight movements in a moment. So hydrogen fuel cell vehicles present an opportunity for zero emissions driving. As I said before, we talk about that one-for-one replacement, so without impacting the performance ability of the current vehicles on the roads today. The other one which doesn't get enough attention, and I really feel that it should, in some ways the ALP did actually talk about our fuel security in a way that was quite important. And Bill Shorten, throughout the election campaign, proposed Australia has a government reserve of liquid fuel stocks. This actually makes a lot of sense. So, because most of us in our lifetime haven't seen a liquid fuel supply shock, we don't really feel that issue, that impending issue. So at the moment, our petrol and diesel fuels, we have they estimate about 30 days of reserve in Australia at the moment. So should there be a supply shock from the Middle East or somewhere along that supply chain, we have a major issue in keeping our vehicles moving in Australia. Hydrogen, with its ability to be produced anywhere, obviously presents an opportunity to mitigate that risk associated with those global supply chains in a very unstable world right now. The government is going through a liquid fuels review at present, noting that this is an area that needs to be looked at more closely. But in terms of our position, government reserve of liquid fuels, yes, that may be important, but at the same time, start investing in fuels that we can actually make in Australia. It means that we, as I say, remove that risk completely. And particularly when you're talking about those critical vehicles such as the defence sector or heavy vehicles with freight movements, hydrogen, as I mentioned, has particular strengths in those really critical markets, vehicle segments. So we're encouraging governments to start investing in hydrogen production and looking at fuel cell vehicles for that reason too. And the third reason why hydrogen is so important is about our road freight movements. So I was looking at Queensland alone. Over the next 5 years, your road freight movements are expected to increase by 20%, which is just incredible. And that's very much in the online shopping age has caused some of that. Also the increasing population as well. Wider, so longer retail hours. All of those factors have meant that we have a growing number of freight vehicles on our roads. They create noise, they create pollution, they can create congestion. From a pollution and noise perspective, obviously hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are almost quiet, so it means that we can have trucks running at all hours of the night without disturbing local residents, and they emit no noxious emissions. So there's another opportunity there to really wind back some of the damaging influence that our increased freight movements have across Australia. So our global parent body, the Hydrogen Council, is obviously doing a lot of work in this space to really understand what is the opportunity for hydrogen vehicles, but also other applications in the future. And their forecasts are about by 2050, we expect to see about 20 to 25% of all vehicles across segments being hydrogen. So whether that's passenger vehicles, whether that's trucks, whether that's trains, and I'll talk about trains very shortly, being powered by hydrogen. So this is obviously their forecast, which they see we'll see on the road. So that means that potentially in the future, 1 in every 4 or 5 passenger cars you see on the roads will be powered by hydrogen. And governments are really reflecting this forecast as well, which I'll talk about shortly. But you can see the entry timing of these various transport modes differs quite significantly. So the vehicles that are really quite mature today, fully commercialised, that are powered by hydrogen, are really forklifts, cars and buses. So forklifts is a really good example of the suitability of hydrogen versus batteries. There's about 20,000 hydrogen-powered forklifts in the US at the moment. Amazon, Walmart, IKEA all run fleets of hydrogen forklifts in their facilities, and they utilise the rooftop, the solar array. They then use that solar, have an electrolyser on site. They generate their own hydrogen on site, and then they fill that with their forklifts. When you talk about a battery electric forklift, I understand it's 888. So 8 hours of use, 8 hours of charge, and 8 hours of cool down. So with hydrogen, however, you refuel in 2 minutes and you're good to go for almost the entire shift. So while the cost of a hydrogen forklift is higher up front, these companies have obviously done their life cycle analysis, and they realise that over the lifespan of that hydrogen forklift, it's far more cost effective than battery electric. So there's an opportunity there, and both Toyota and a US company called Hyster-Yale are both selling hydrogen forklifts in Australia right now. The other one is buses. So buses have been on the roads around the world for about 15 years now. Not a huge amount of visibility around hydrogen buses, but increasingly there will be. As I mentioned, hydrogen buses represent that one-for-one replacement with diesel or CNG buses. The range capability, the fact that there's no impact on passenger capacity. But they do an amazing job of decarbonising and reducing noxious emissions for the bus sector, which is often a major issue in capital cities. So we're working with state governments predominantly, also the Queensland government, really trying to urge them about the opportunity around hydrogen buses At this point, we're obviously very much at the point of educating them about the technology, introducing them to the opportunity that they present at the button. But we envisage over the next year or two, we will have some form of hydrogen bus fleet in Australia, which is really exciting. But then even beyond that, there are opportunities for trains, and Germany has introduced 2 hydrogen trains that are running in Saxony, which are doing commercial routes, so they're carrying passengers now. The UK and France have also made announcements around introducing hydrogen trains to their diesel rolling stock. And all these countries looked at the analysis in terms of do we electrify our existing diesel line, or is hydrogen an option? And when they do the figures, it shows that electrification is very expensive, and the introduction of hydrogen rolling stock is a far more viable option, because you only need a refueling station, say at the beginning and the end of the route, and the actual route itself is not impacted. So it really goes to show that there's absolutely an opportunity there. And then maritime. So maritime is one of the biggest challenges for the reduction of emissions in the transport sector. And the IMO has hugely ambitious requirements around reducing emissions from vessels, from freight vessels, but also cruise ships. And so a number of cruise ship operators are actually looking at how they can start introducing hydrogen fuel cell cruise ships. So from a passenger enjoyment perspective, being out on the water in a cruise ship that doesn't emit any CO2, you're not leaking any fuel, there's no smell, no noise. Obviously, they recognise that from a passenger experience perspective, that hydrogen would be a really good replacement for the current cruise ship now. So as I mentioned, this technology is becoming increasingly commercialised across every segment. And we're seeing leading markets such as Japan, Korea, California, parts of Europe and the UK really starting to introduce all of these transport modes. So it's very exciting, and we really think there's an opportunity for Australia for all of them. Being a smaller market, it's going to take us a little while longer to get our hands on some trucks, for instance, but we have passenger cars on sale in Australia right now. We have forklifts on sale right now. We also envisage that we'll see bus fleets rolling out in the not too distant future. But clearly, our heavy trucking industry, there's a massive opportunity there. So we have been engaging with the tolls and lift boxes of the world to understand what their requirements are and their appetite for transitioning to zero-emission vehicles. In terms of how a hydrogen vehicle works, so I won't go into that because I'm sure this room fully understands. But one thing I might talk about is what the hydrogen refueling infrastructure actually looks like. And I'm quite pleased to have someone in the room that does this for a living. So do jump in, Chris, if you have anything you would like to add. But this is an example of a station in the UK. The wonderful thing about hydrogen is the ability to generate it on site. So this particular station has an electrolyser behind it, connected to some rooftop solar, but also connected to the grid, obviously, producing hydrogen and powering vehicles. So there are various models of station rollout around the world. Some of them, as I said, you may have the hydrogen produced on the forecourt, or perhaps centralised production, where you're producing that hydrogen in one location and then delivering it to the site. And what we're seeing is really a combination of both models. That delivery can be via tube trailer, or really the ultimate is gas pipeline, and we've seen that in some cases in California. So California has really taken the lead in the hydrogen refuelling space. Their government has committed to fund the first 100 stations, and they provide about 50% co-investment for that, to ensure that the hydrogen is increasingly green. However, they do require that a third of the hydrogen is sourced from renewable energy. So they currently have 40 or so stations in California. They're targeting 1,000 stations by 2030, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But what that means is that they've really been able to create a cluster model. So the clusters predominantly are in Los Angeles and San Francisco, where people are able to buy passenger cars relatively easily. There's a number of stations that they can access, so if one goes down, there's always a backup station. Because they've had that, they've been able to successfully develop that cluster model. They're now looking at connecting cities, so that's the next phase for them. So they've sold about 6,500 fuel cell vehicle passenger cars at this point in time. They have some buses, but now they can look at bigger opportunities around trucks. And so Toyota is looking at trucks as part of a project they're doing with Kenworth in the Port of Long Beach in California, where they've taken 2 Mirai fuel cells, which is the passenger car that Toyota manufactures, put them into a Kenworth truck, and with greater amount of hydrogen storage, of course, versus the passenger car, and they're using those trucks for freight movements around the Port of Long Beach. So it really demonstrates the scalability of passenger car technology into heavy vehicles. So California inevitably will start to go down that pathway of introducing heavy vehicles over time, which can utilise these stations, which have the flexibility of supporting passenger cars and heavy vehicles. So governments worldwide are introducing targets around hydrogen vehicles and hydrogen stations, and including there some of the leading countries that are really pioneering this space. So California, as I said, 1,000 stations by 2030. They've chosen 1,000 stations because those 1,000 stations essentially will replicate the accessibility that they have to the 7,000 gasoline stations across the state right now. So unfortunately, because it's a brand new sector, you can actually map out the location of these stations and be far more strategic than what you would otherwise, which is a higgledy-piggledy approach that we see now with our common fuels. So based on that modelling exercise, they've chosen 1,000 stations, which means that every resident of California has the same access that they do to a gasoline station right now. China has been somewhat late to the party when it comes to hydrogen, but you may have heard recent news around many of their government support mechanisms are transitioning from battery electric vehicles into hydrogen fuel cell. So they recognise that battery electric can only play one part of the puzzle in terms of decarbonising transport, and now they're targeting fuel cell vehicles, both from a manufacturing perspective but also incentives. And we're seeing brand new Chinese startup companies emerge with hydrogen models on the market now, and there was one just about 2 weeks ago. So increasingly we're going to see Chinese companies come out with hydrogen vehicles that will be competing with major OEMs. Equally, Japan, they've got big ambitions. They currently have 100 stations across Japan. They're targeting 160 for the Tokyo Olympics, just to really showcase that technology. And then progressively increased to 900 stations in 2030. So these are really, really ambitious figures. And through these sorts of volumes, we'll actually be able to get the costs of the stations themselves down. At the moment, the electrolyzers, the stations themselves are predominantly hand-built because the volumes are so low, which does mean that they're expensive. So Siemens, for instance, a major manufacturer of electrolyzers, they build most of their electrolyzers by hand in Germany. Then, of course, we need to ship them to Australia. So progressively, as we can automate those processes, we'll be able to get the cost down of the equipment, which is really key to growing this sector. So what are we doing in Australia? So right now we have 2 hydrogen refueling stations across the country. Both of them private stations operated by Hyundai and Toyota to support their own fleet of vehicles. Toyota has 13 of the fuel cell Mirai at the moment in the country. I'm very fortunate. The association I work for has been provided a Mirai to drive on a regular basis. So I've had the privilege of living with that car every day, and it's just like an ordinary vehicle. There's obviously one place to refuel it. Fortunately, I don't live too far away, so that's somewhat convenient. But it really has been just like living with any other car. So it's smooth, it's quiet, it's got great pickup, it's got really good range. I'm really going to miss it when I have to hand it back. But Toyota will, as part of will have a broader loan program where they're lending those vehicles to local councils, state governments, private companies, to just build that understanding, awareness, and it's really part of getting that social licence for hydrogen as well. We also had, as I mentioned, a very exciting announcement 2 weeks ago. The first public station will be commissioned in December of this year. That's a partnership between the ACT government and ActuAGL. So ActuAGL, which is the utility company in the ACT, will be the owner and operator of that station. And so it's quite interesting, that site they've selected is currently a CNG site. So they will convert one of those CNG stations to hydrogen to support initially the 20 vehicles the ACT government will acquire, but also be able to open that to the general public to buy fuel cell vehicles for the first time. I also do a huge amount of government engagement, and one thing that I love to do, and I wish that I had a Mirai with me up here tonight, because a bunch of engineers, you know that the only byproduct of the process of combining hydrogen and oxygen is water. So these cars only emit water, and that water comes out of the exhaust pipe of the vehicle. So one of my favourite stunts when I meet politicians is getting them to drink the fuel cell water. And I've been 100% so far, and being able to get them to do that, which is very exciting. Toyota hates me doing it, just in case something happens to someone, but it's pure water. There might be a little bit of chemical that's picked up as passes out the pipes of the vehicle, but generally it's very, very safe. But it really demonstrates how clean this technology is, the fact that the only byproduct is water that is drinkable. so which is very exciting. So we really are getting governments on board, and through the National Hydrogen Strategy, we are developing a roadmap or a mapping exercise to identify where should we be placing these stations across Australia. So the other important opportunity which I want to touch on is power to gas, and you may have had a lot of discussion around the opportunity to inject hydrogen into natural gas networks. So obviously we've done a huge amount of work in Australia and around the world in reducing the emissions from the electricity sector. But natural gas is something that hasn't been looked at to quite the same degree. And there is a real push in Australia and elsewhere around, well, why don't we just electrify everything? And of course, the natural gas suppliers will say, no, don't do that. And they've actually done a lot of studies around what is the cost comparison between electrifying existing sort of areas of gas networks versus converting those gas networks to natural gas, from natural gas to hydrogen. So essentially power to gas means that you're taking, as it says up there, surplus renewable electricity, you're turning that electricity into hydrogen, you're then injecting that hydrogen into existing gas networks and supplying it as a blend. So currently a blend of natural gas and hydrogen. And some of our members, such as AIE, Gemini and APCO, are looking at blends of up to 10% hydrogen. So each of them have essentially sectioned off a small part of their network to start trialling that blending and to see what sort of impacts it has on households. We envisage that up to 10% will be completely negligible, but obviously the whole purpose is to move up to 100% hydrogen over time. And so one of our members, Australian Gas Infrastructure Group, they operate gas pipelines in both Victoria and South Australia. They're currently going through a process of identifying 2 regional cities where they can look at progressively increasing the level of hydrogen in those networks and looking at how the pipelines react, what's the input, what's the effects on appliances. So there's a lot of study that needs to be done to achieve that. Equally, that's being looked at as a real opportunity in Europe, and Europe is very much pioneering the power to gas space, given that there are some large uses of natural gas. But equally, Australia is coming up very quickly as well in recognition that not only can hydrogen decarbonise the natural gas sector, but natural gas pipelines actually represent an amazing opportunity to store excess renewable energy. And I believe Gemini, who is doing a project in Western Sydney, where they have a small part of their network where they're trialling hydrogen injection, their network in that area alone represents about 8 million power walls in terms of the energy that it can store. So it's a big opportunity there. I should also add, just to go back, the Energy Networks Australia just released a report last week which really looked at existing gas regulations, both the National Gas Code but also state and territory gas codes as well, to understand, does hydrogen blends have any issues, are there any issues in terms of meeting those regulations? And they found that the ability to inject hydrogen into natural gas networks is completely achievable and doable from a regulatory perspective. So that's quite exciting that that is now confirmed. And I've already touched on export. So export is really the big game in town at the moment, and that's why we've seen a huge amount of traction around hydrogen, the bipartisan support for hydrogen, the significant groundswell of political will around identifying that Australia has an opportunity to ship its sunshine to the world. And obviously Queensland is very much at the heart of that conversation. Our message to governments is that yes, export is obviously very, very important, but at the same time we need to actually ensure that we're developing a domestic hydrogen sector. We need to build skills, we need to build capability, we need to progressively scale up our production of hydrogen over time to then be ready to be an exporter of hydrogen when that demand kicks in, which is going to be around 2030 plus. So as I said, we've got 10 years essentially to get it right. And we think the 2 areas where government should be looking at skilling up its people in hydrogen is really the transport sector, as I've touched on, and power to gas. So the volume opportunity is really injecting hydrogen in gas networks. So both of those, we're urging governments to look at supporting them side by side in readiness for that export when Japan, when Korea, puts out that signal and says that we're ready to start importing large volumes of hydrogen to power our economies. So, as I mentioned, there's a massive groundswell from governments around hydrogen. So the Queensland government is, as I said, is soon to release its hydrogen strategy in June. South Australians currently have this hydrogen strategy being implemented. Both Victoria and WA also have a strategy in development. So our as an industry association, our call to state governments has been, consistency, harmonisation. We don't want to end up at a point where we have different regulations in different states. We need a national framework. And that's really the opportunity where the national strategy is playing a key role in ensuring that each state government is talking to one another, is obviously looking to their competitive strengths in terms of how they can play in the hydrogen sector, but making sure that we have that overarching national framework as well. So the National Hydrogen Strategy is about midway through its process at the moment. It's currently being developed through COAG, so every state, territory and federal government is involved in that process, which is really good from the perspective that it means buy-in. It means national buy-in. It means that no matter what side of politics gets in any state, territory or federal government, that this has a mandate. And so it should be published by December of 2019. And really its objective is how can Australia be a major hydrogen player by 2030. So it's a hugely ambitious undertaking. So what that strategy is doing is looking at 6 work streams, really where there's key areas for hydrogen to start to scale and play an important role. And so the purpose of that is actually to identify various incentives, support programs, mechanisms to be able to implement and grow a hydrogen domestic sector and export over the period 2020 to 2030. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And there's extensive consultation that the federal government is currently undertaking across Australia to make sure that they get the views and feedback from general public, from industry, from other governments to make sure that it's a fully consultative strategy. And as I mentioned, it's been spearheaded by a chief scientist who has been a wonderful advocate for the sector both here and internationally as well. So it's really pleasing that there will be national coordination to take advantage of this important opportunity. And so our association is working very closely with the federal government, particularly around the transport piece and that mapping exercise to identify where to put the stations. But within the strategy as well, we're also looking at how do we inject up to 10% hydrogen in gas networks in a way that doesn't impact the infrastructure, in a way that meets regulations. So that's another key opportunity. And then the cross-cutting issues is all about the regulatory piece. So making sure the standards are in place, making sure that they're not overburdensome, but they provide sufficient safety for consumers. Because one of our key challenges as a sector is social licence. So the awareness of hydrogen is relatively low. There are safety concerns associated with hydrogen as well. And so it is our job as the industry association to work with the general public, to work with industry, to work with governments to really secure that social licence for hydrogen. Because without that, we're not going to be able to grow the sector. And so just to conclude, I saw a great speech by Ross Garno in Melbourne about 2 weeks ago now, when he talked about Australia being a superpower of the post-carbon world. So he thinks that Australia's position, with our abundance of natural resources, we have a really important role to play by embracing the post-carbon economy. And part of that is shipping our resources to the world to enable them to decarbonise their sectors. So whether it may be in the resources sector through copper, titanium, lithium, and so forth, or shipping our renewable energy in the form of hydrogen to the world, by really embracing that post-carbon world, he's forecasting that we can be even more of a secure country and financially abundant than we ever have before. We just need to take advantage of this groundswell that's happening around the world to decarbonise, and we're in a very good place to do so. So thank you so much for having me. So I believe we have time for questions. Wonderful.
The Toyota Variety unit, I'm just curious whether it operates like a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Like, I know it's not a hybrid, but does it have a battery, and can the battery be topped up at home? Like in your case, where there's only one station, can you charge the battery?
So it is like a hybrid, and that has the same size of battery. That's mainly to capture the redemptive braking that occurs, but you can't actually plug it in like you would plug in an electric vehicle.
Yeah, okay.
To power that vehicle, you power with compressed hydrogen gas, which is obviously the main energy storage mechanism. But then it has that very small battery on board as well, capturing that renewable.
Right, so the battery works like a regulator. source.
Yeah, exactly right. So no, so these vehicles are powered solely by hydrogen.
And I had another question too, which was you mentioned the Californian example where they have a 1/3 renewable target for hydrogen to be classed as green. Does Hydrogen Mobility Australia have a similar target? And if not, or if so, does that put obstacles in the way of using existing infrastructure in Australia to develop hydrogen in the industry?
Yes. So look, our whole purpose for being is to support the clean hydrogen sector. So you're right, the majority of hydrogen produced in Australia at the moment is through steel reforming of natural gas. But progressively, even our traditional gas companies who are on board are looking at ways to produce clean hydrogen. So we don't have a target as such as yet, but we'll absolutely be following the California model because it really defeats the purpose of a hydrogen economy otherwise. The hydrogen has to be clean and it's either from renewables or the other alternative is fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage, which the jury's still out on, of course. So in our instance, with our abundance of renewable energy, we think that ultimately we need to transition to a green hydrogen fuel source sooner rather than later.
And would that be regulated, do you think?
We probably haven't got to that point of discussion around whether it be a regulation that's in place. I'd like to think that the industry would do a lot of heavy lifting on its own before regulation would be required. Because we're still very much in our infancy, where obviously we do require stepping stone fuels to be able to help us to bring these fuels into the marketplace when green sources aren't available. But Toyota, for instance, they've announced their own refueling station. All of their hydrogen produced will be green hydrogen. So being the OEM, they really want to take a leadership role and really demonstrate that we want to be a green-powered mobility sector. What we are doing to make sure that the end consumer of the hydrogen actually knows how their hydrogen is produced is we have partnered with the CSIRO to develop a hydrogen accreditation scheme. It's very similar to what a scheme in Europe called Certify, which provides that guarantee of origin. So as the end consumer, you know whether your hydrogen is produced from renewables, whether it's produced from natural gas, whether it's produced from brown coal. So it provides that label of green, blue, brown, and so forth. So we think that we should absolutely be doing the same here, just so we can be as transparent as possible with the end consumer.
Any inkling what the new government's policy or strategy for hydrogen may be in the near future?
Well, I guess there's a big question mark around that. We're waiting to see, so the coalition supports the National Hydrogen Strategy development. That's currently about halfway through its process. We are yet to see exactly what programs, initiatives, funding and support will be provided for hydrogen. We know that there's money available already through ARENA. So ARENA has funded a number of hydrogen projects, including the Toyota project, which was recently announced in Melbourne. Federal government, of course, there's a much bigger picture with the federal government beyond hydrogen. Hydrogen is just part of the energy sector. So there's obviously a lot of uncertainty around energy policy at this point in time. So we'll have to wait and see.
At final scale, what would be the cost per kilometre versus petrol?
So our price target is to, at the beginning, to be price equivalent to petrol or diesel. So we recognise if we're any more expensive than those fuels, it's going to be very difficult for us to make a mark in the transport sector. So that's our initial price target, is price equivalence, and that's what we're seeing in California, for instance. And steadily, prices of hydrogen will decline. It's really about scale, because as I said, in California's instance, about 6,500 cars on the road versus the millions of vehicles running on internal combustion. So we know that prices will decline, but at this point, what we're seeing is about price equivalence.
Is there any strategy, you talk about the federal strategy for hydrogen? Obviously, it is driven by scale, and you see that with other fuel markets around the world. They drive the scale markets, drive the price. If Australia wants to capture that market, be a key technical player in producing, is there any discussion happening around the logistics of that, the legislation of that, the economic framework that we need to put in place to protect Australian interests around that scale that we don't have but we're exporting to?
Yeah, so we aren't the only ones that are looking at this opportunity to produce hydrogen in volume. Really, as a chief scientist says, the race is on, actually. And some of the countries we will be competing with are predominantly Norway and Middle East, Saudi Arabia. So they are scaling, they're gearing up to become major hydrogen producers. One of our key advantages, however, is we already have investments in hydrogen export projects now. We've got our proximity, we've got our existing trading relationships off the back of iron ore and LNG. So we know that we have what is required to build a new export commodity through hydrogen. In terms of the logistics, so the supply chains currently don't exist. I suppose in the case of ammonia they do, but when we're talking about liquid hydrogen, the logistics of that is challenging. So as I mentioned, there is a project in the Latrobe Valley, Melbourne, which will gasify brown coal, convert it into liquid hydrogen, and then ship it to Japan. Those require special dedicated vessels for transport of liquid hydrogen, which are currently being manufactured by Kawasaki. So the supply chains currently don't exist. We think that we have some competitive strengths that mean that we're kind of ahead of the 8 ball, particularly off the back of our LNG experience. But we are building a brand new sector too.
Is the energy density similar to something like petrol?
It's about twice as efficient as petrol. So hydrogen really can be as energy dense as how you choose to compress it, essentially. So it can be a highly, highly energy dense fuel. In terms of passenger vehicle refueling, it's about 700 bar, so quite a high level of compression there. For heavy vehicles, 350 bar. So hydrogen has capacity to be highly energy dense.
And but using electrolysis per litre of hydrogen, how much water is it required?
Yeah, so it's about 10 litres of water per every kilo of hydrogen. So in the case of a passenger car, it's filling that with about 5 kilos of hydrogen, so 50 litres of water. And we get a lot of questions about how much water will be used, particularly more around if we do become an exporter of hydrogen. And we do have issues with drought and water supply. And so we did the figures. The chief scientist released a report in August of last year called Hydrogen for Australia's Future. And of course he covered off the water question because it's one that often gets asked, particularly by politicians. And when he looked at the figures, he found that to replicate the same energy amount that we're currently exporting as LNG. So let's take LNG energy density by gigajoule, and if we were to ship the same amount of hydrogen as LNG energy density, the water required would be about 2.5% of how much water all of Australia uses right now, which represents about half of the total mining sector currently. So we're talking about a massive, massive industry here. So it gives you a sense of the water required to enable an export sector, which isn't as high as, it's a lot, but it's not as much as other sectors.
Could you use seawater?
Well, that is the alternate. So yes, there's a lot of R&D going on around seawater. It needs to be desalinated, of course, and so that is an opportunity with some redundant desalination plant in Victoria. That could certainly be used for the purpose of making hydrogen at scale. And the chief scientists again did the figures to understand what if we did use seawater and existing desalination infrastructure, the cost addition, the premium that we added is very, very minor. So that could be an opportunity. Toyota has a great experiment. They have a yacht that's currently sailing around the world. It's completely self-generated. So they've got solar panels on the top of the yacht's catamaran. They've got a small wind turbine, and they've got an electrolyser, and that's powered by seawater. So you can do it, but just not on a commercial scale yet.
An electrolyser, so an electrolyser is a device that turns the water into hydrogen, extracts the hydrogen.
Yes, that's right. So it's the water splitting process. So the only inputs into electrolyser are, of course, water and electricity. The electricity is used to split the water into hydrogen molecules and oxygen molecules. you capture the hydrogen molecules and the oxygen molecules can go and you can store those as well, or they can simply go into the air.
Look, it's kind of actually good, it's really good, but I
That's
was
all right.
saying, how long does a hydrogen fuel cell operate for replacing?
Well, it can almost be infinite. So, because it's just a chemical process between the hydrogen and the oxygen. So, the only thing that will degrade a fuel cell is if it's poisoned. So, if you are, in the case of a vehicle, as I mentioned, you need high purity hydrogen, 99.999%. If you feed hydrogen through that fuel cell that is less than that purity, you will cause fuel cell poisoning progressively over time. So, that can obviously degrade the performance. But in terms of the vehicles, I believe Toyota and Hyundai, they do certify them for, I think it's 10 years. Hyundai provides a warranty for 10 years. But that's not in recognition of the degradation necessarily of the fuel cell. They just have to obviously provide a form of warranty for the whole vehicle. But Preston, your experience, fuel cell degradation?
Oh yeah, it's all about the poison and the gas.
How much should it cost? For say a passenger car?
So the Toyota Mirai is on sale across the world now. In the States, it's about $57,500 US dollars. So what's that? 85,000 Australian. So it is more expensive, and that's partly because the volumes are still quite low. We know that we need to get the cost down to be competitive, and Toyota has a pathway to do that. They announced last year that they are building a new factory to produce both fuel cells and hydrogen tanks, so they can scale up that production. So we'll see cost declines, but at this point, that's the current price, the retail price.
You want to give that now?